Hello and welcome to today's PSMJ webinar, COVID-19 and AEC Project Management, Making Work from Home Work. My name is Kathy Cesari of PSMJ. I'm thrilled you guys can join us today. Love it. Before we get started with Dave, I'll go over a couple of housekeeping details. I know you guys are used to this, but we do have a Q&A session at the end, but please submit your questions. I got a lot of questions ahead of time. Thank you so much. And I went over with some questions with Dave. So we'll be picking from those. And if you have any as well, we'll try to get them in there as well. And also this is okayed for continuing education credits. So if you do want to access that, you have to send your AIA number to customer service at psmj.com. I will be sending a link to your attendance certificate that you can submit to states and licensing boards and your internal training if you need it. Not all, of course, not all states and licensing boards accept this kind of credit. But if you need information and need us to help you out, just write to customer service at psmj.com. And I will be working on an email as soon as I can. We'll have the handout, which is the slides. Dave will send them to me. He has a final copy. And we will be doing a attendance certificate and a recording and also a video. So audio and video. So with that, I want to welcome Dave Bernstein.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And by the way, Kathy, if there's some questions that are relevant to some of the stuff I'm talking about, go ahead and interrupt me and throw the questions in.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much.
Yep. So I actually kind of retitled this a little bit. And I've been thinking that we have all been forced into an experiment. Like it or not, the experiment is, how do you keep your company going when everybody can't go to the office? And so during the last, 8 or 9 months, I guess it is, we've been all experimenting with different ways to make this work. And so we've learned lessons. And what I'd like to do here is to share some of the lessons that we've learned, but also to encourage you to share your lessons about what you've learned, because I think a lot of those lessons are going to last beyond the pandemic. And from what I'm seeing, a lot of the things that we're doing now, we're going to continue to do, even when everybody is safe and nobody's wearing masks and everybody can go back to the office. But it's not going to be the same office that we saw. So that's really what I want to talk about. I want to start with a brief history of what used to be called teleworking and now is being called working from home. And something's arrived when it's got its own acronym. And now people say WFH, and everybody knows it means working from home. So I guess we used to call it telecommuting, and then it got into teleworking, and now it's working from home. And some people are calling it working from anywhere. Anyway, I'll give you a little history on that. Then I want to talk about the overall impacts of COVID-19 on our industry. And then I'm going to zoom in on a couple, no pun intended, on a couple of specific things. What's the impact on our employees? What's the impact on our productivity? What's the impact on our profitability? And then I'll talk about some suggestions as to what you should do. And we'll open it up for some additional Q&A. But again, Kathy can jump in and throw some of those questions in as we go. So let's start with a brief history of teleworking in our industry. Starting in 2007, in our biannual bonus and benefit survey, we've asked some questions about this. So we've actually been collecting data for the last 12 years. And one of the questions that we asked is about, do you allow employees to telework? And do you actually have employees teleworking? And the blue bar is the percentage of firms that are allowing their employees to telework. And the red bar is firms that actually have people doing it. And you can see both sets of bars have been really going up consistently. In 2007, only 59% of the firms even allowed it. That's gone up to 87% in 2019. Remember, 2019 is before COVID. And then in 2007, only 32% of firms actually had people teleworking. That went all the way up to from 1/3 to 2/3 of the people 12 years later. So you can see there's been a steady progression. We've also seen a similar progression in terms of firms that are not only allowing it, but actually paying for the IT costs. It's gone from 35% in 2007 to double that, 70% in 2019. So you can see again, the trend was well underway before COVID hit us. When you break it down by size, this is the most recent data taken for 2019. And what you can see is there's kind of a step function until you get up to about 100 employees. Right around 50 to 60% of the firms allowed working from home. But once you hit 100, it jumped up to 69% from firms of 100 to 250. But then it jumped into the 90s for firms of over 250. So you can see that larger firms were much more amenable to this idea than smaller firms. Another way to look at it is on the kinds of firms, the practices of those firms. And what we saw again was kind of a step function here, two tiers. The engineering subs, the environmental firms, the engineering primes, people whose workforce was predominantly engineers and scientists, were much less able or much less willing to offer people, their employees, to work from home versus firms that were more architecturally and designer oriented. So you can see a significant difference there. And I think there's a couple of factors in there. One is that architects believe that they're stronger believers in the need for collaboration than engineers or scientists. Engineers and scientists are more willing to let people work from home because they don't see as much of a need for collaboration as architects or interiors people. I think there's also a personality difference. I think engineers and scientists tend to be a little bit more introverted. Architects and interior people tend to be a little bit more extroverted. So I think that has to do with it as well. But there's definitely was a difference. Let's look at the overall impact of COVID-19 on our industry. So one way to measure the impact is on the weekly initial claims for state unemployment insurance. And you can see pre-COVID, we were down here around 200,000 to maybe 250,000 weekly unemployment claims. And it was quite steady. And then all of a sudden, here's COVID, boom, it just shot up. Here's the 4-week average, but you can just see in the bars. I mean, it just shot up. And then it's gradually been coming down as the economy's been, this back here was in the time when everything was shut down. But as things opened up, it's been gradually coming down and it's kind of reached a plateau in the 800 to 900,000 per week range. Well, that's like 4 times what it was before COVID hit. And so you can see there was an immediate impact, but even a longer lasting impact. 4 times the previous unemployment rates is pretty significant. But if you look at all the different industries, this is the percentages of businesses that were adversely affected by COVID-19. And each of these numbers is a US government NAICS code. Well, that code for the architect and engineering industry is code 55. So here was the national average. 34% of firms were adversely affected, but you can see that we were actually affected to a lesser degree than most. And this is different from what happened in the 2008 recession when we actually, our bar for this graph was way above the average. We were really hit hard by that. We weren't quite as hard hit in this recession. This is the total employment in the United States in thousands. So you can see in January of 2019, we were just shy of 1.5 million total employees in AE firms. That went up throughout 2019. And by the time we hit 2020, January of 2020, and then we kept going for a little while, COVID hit in March. And so you can see we actually got up to 1,540,000. And then all of a sudden, boom, we dropped by 5%. Well, this graph is, expanded scale, so it looks really drastic, but in fact, it's only a 5% drop. And really, I think most firms have been staffing up over the past 10 years or so to the point where losing the bottom 5% of their workforce is really not a tragedy from a firm standpoint. Obviously, there was a human cost to that, but from a firm standpoint, it really wasn't terrible. Way, way less than the dip that we saw in 2008. And even better news is that as soon as this dip was over and things started picking up a little bit, you can see a gradual increase in employment, and then kind of a steepening of that curve to the point now where the most recent data was for the end of September. And you can see that we've now gotten about halfway back to where we were at the peak. And it looks like if this trend continues, by the end of the year, we'll be pretty much where we were before the COVID thing started. So compared to the 2008 recession, this is much, much less of an impact on our industry. So let's start our first polling question, let's look forward to 2021. Do you see your firm decreasing its staffing in 21, staying about the same, or increasing the staffing? So Kathy, let's see what everybody says.
Let me know when you want to stop.
Yeah, you can stop at about 80%.
Okay.
When you hit about 80%, you can stop that. That usually stabilizes it pretty well. And this is going to be really interesting because we've pretty much come back, but let's see if people expand. All right, so interesting. Only 6% are looking at decreasing staffing. Wow, that's a small number. 40% are looking at increasing staffing. So it looks like remember the war for talent everybody was talking about last year? It's back. People are going to be expanding again. The war for talent is going to be on again, especially when all the restrictions come off. Then I think it's really going to pick up. But this is very interesting. Only 6% are looking at decreasing staffing. 94% either staying the same or 40% increasing. Interesting. Let's talk about the impact of COVID-19 on our employees. So we did an interesting study. We took 4 firms who volunteered to participate in this study, and we wanted some diversity in these firms. We wanted diversity geographically, and we wanted diversity in types of firms. So we picked one firm from Western Canada, one firm from California, one firm from New England, and one firm from the Southeast. And in terms of types of firms, we also picked some diverse firms there: geotech, structural, environmental, and architecture. So we felt like this would give us a good cross-section on the overall industry. We did a little demographics, and we wanted to get firms where people were pretty experienced and even more importantly, pretty well tenured within the firm, because we felt that would give us better data, and these firms were. In terms of experience, relevant experience, you can see only about 2% of the people in this survey, in this study group, had less than 1 year experience. Most of them had, way more than 1 year. In terms of with the firm, only about 8% had been with the firm less than a year. Most of them had been significantly more than a year. So it was a good, stable group, which is exactly what we wanted for this study. We also looked at how much time they'd been working from home, and the vast majority, like over 90%, had been working from home just since the COVID-19 crisis. And again, that's exactly what we wanted, because that would give us a good comparison of pre-COVID and post-COVID in terms of working from home. Percent of time, over half of them were working 100% of their time from home. And if you include those that were working for 75%, it's even more. And those working 50 to 75%, you include those, it's even more. So you can see definitely, again, this is exactly the kind of study group we wanted. So we asked a series of questions. The first question that we asked, or one of the first questions we asked, was, what benefits to you personally do you see from working from home? And we asked them to rate that on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being no benefit at all, 3 being somewhat beneficial, and 5 being highly beneficial. So I kind of drew this little thick line at the 3 to differentiate between things that were less than somewhat beneficial and things that are more than somewhat beneficial. The biggest benefit. Oh, and by the way, we did the survey twice. We did the survey in April when people were just starting to work from home. Then we redid it in late August, where people had been working from home for a while. And in both cases, what we saw was it was the amount of time saved, the amount of time saved from not having to commute during rush hour, not having to get dressed and show up to the office that way, basic time saving. The second benefit we saw was on saving money, gas, clothes, lunch, all the things that come with going to the office every day. A little bit of a dip here between April and August, but still that was pretty big. And then the third benefit was more flexibility in managing their own schedule. So people talk about work-life balance. What's happening now is we're seeing work-life blending instead of work-life balance. Then it kind of drops off, improved family life, and so on and so forth. So those are the benefits that employees were seeing. We then asked for their biggest challenges, and interestingly enough, we saw a lot higher benefit ratings than we saw challenges ratings. The biggest challenge was barely up to this 3.0, and that was lack of socialization with coworkers. Kind of interesting when you compare April to August, all these two went up a little bit. In other words, people got a little bit more lonely working from home, and the lack of socialization became a little bit more important. Inadequate workspace, they were kind of getting tired of working at the kitchen table. And, they didn't, and they, gosh, I sure wish I had a plotter here because I'd like to plot out something. So things like that became a little bit more annoying. Some other things became less annoying. Personal distractions. Well, a lot of their kids went to school, and so they didn't have that distraction. So kind of interesting, little bit of shifting. And remember, these are the same employees. We surveyed the same people, both in April and in August. So that was pretty interesting. We then asked them, how much do you enjoy working from home versus working from the office, and what their preferences are in terms of the split of working from home and the office. What we found in April is only about 2% said that they would like to work entirely from home. They really weren't all that keen about it. Going to the other extreme, only about 8% said that they wanted to work entirely from the office. So if you combine those two, what you see is only about 10% of the employees in April, when we surveyed them in April, said that they either wanted to work completely from home or completely from the office. All of them wanted a mix. The highest bar here was mostly in the office, but some from home, 50-50 and this sort of thing. So this was April. 90% wanted a mix. Most of them wanted that mix to be shifted toward working mostly in the office, but somewhat at home. Let's fast forward to August. And let's look at some of these data. First, let's look at this. So the people who wanted to work entirely from home went from 2% to about 7%. The people who wanted to work entirely from the office went from 8% down to 6%. So those were a couple of shifts, but here's the bigger shifts. The people who preferred to work mostly from home, but some from the office, went from under 20% to over 30% in August. After they got used to it, they kind of liked working from home more. And the people who originally wanted to work mostly in the office, but some from home, went from 40% down to a little over 20%. So you can see what's happening here is that as people get more comfortable working from home, they kind of like it. Now, they don't like it enough where they want to work entirely from home, but their preference is shifting from working primarily in the office to working primarily from home. So then we asked them in April, if you're allowed to work from home after this crisis is over, would it increase the probability of staying with your firm? And 40% of them said definitely, 27 said maybe, and only a third of them said it would not affect their probability of staying with the firm. So that was April. Let's fast forward to August. And look what changed. The definitelys went from 40% to 53%, and the no's went from 33% down to 15%. So not only are people feeling more comfortable working from home, they're increasingly saying, hey, if you don't let me work from home, it's going to affect my decision as to whether I stay with this firm or go to some other firm. So pretty interesting. We think that the work environment at the office after the pandemic is over is not going to look the same as it did before. Most employees are going to work remotely part of the time. If not for your firm, then they will for the next firm they work for. Office sharing, some people call it hoteling, is going to become a lot more commonplace. We think that private offices are going to be rarer because the times where people need solitude to get some of their work done and to do some things that require privacy, that's going to be work done at home. The collaborative spaces, like in this picture, are going to be much more common because that's what people are going to want to do when they're in the office. So it's going to look different. So, polling question. Let's launch this one, Kathy. When the pandemic is over, 3 choices. We plan to reduce the total number of square feet per employee. We plan to increase the number of square feet per employee, or we plan to keep the amount of square footage per employee about the same. So let's see what everybody says, because not only is the office going to look different, we may actually have more or less square footage or about the same. Let's see what people say. So when we get up to about 80%, you can close this one, Kathy, and maybe we should be playing the Jeopardy theme song while we're
I might warn people this time. Getting close. Last time I just cut it off, and that's not.
But
Couple more seconds.
Yep, I think this is going to be really interesting. So let's see what it says.
All right, we're going to close it.
Yep. So 63%, about a third, say about the same. But look at the difference in the top two. 32% of the firms say they're going to reduce the amount of square footage per employee. Only 5% see that increasing. So that's going to have some implications that I'm going to talk about in a little while. Let's talk about the impact of COVID-19 and the work from home environment on productivity. So again, same group of firms. Questions that we asked them about productivity is, in this case, we actually separated these groups. We separated the surveys. In this case, we surveyed just employees, and then we surveyed project managers too. So here's, first of all, the benefits. Because employees are working from home, do they see significant benefits or not? Well, in April, they were pretty modest. Nobody really got up to this 3.0 line. The employees maybe saw a little bit more benefit in April to working from home. When we asked project managers, they actually saw less than the employees did in both April and August. So the project managers did not perceive as many benefits in working from home from a productivity standpoint now. And those benefits would include things like, not wasting time at unnecessary meetings, those kind of benefits. And also putting in more hours. When a lot of people were saying, gee, instead of commuting 30 minutes each day, each way to work, I take that extra hour I save and I work that hour. So these were that benefit. The interruption benefit, again, the employees saw a benefit, but not a huge benefit. As perceived by the project manager, this is interesting. In April, the project managers did not see that much of a benefit, but by August, they were actually the same as the employees. So not a huge benefit, but the perception was the same in terms of fewer interruptions. So there's definitely some benefit in the employees putting in more hours and fewer interruptions, as perceived by both employees and project managers. So the next thing we asked them is, do you think you're as productive or more productive working from home as working in the office? And we asked that of 2 different groups and 2 different times. So as perceived by the employees, in April, 72% of them said they were as productive or more productive. That went up to 77% in August. But when we asked project managers in April, it was only 63%, and it actually declined to 61%. So overall, it was still a plurality, still more than 50% thought that the employees were as productive or more productive, but project managers didn't think that nearly to the degree that employees did. And whereas employees thought they were getting more productive, project managers thought they were getting slightly less productive. Sometimes negative findings are as interesting as positive findings. So we looked for some correlations based on things that we expected to find. For example, did the number of years of experience correlate with higher productivity working from home? You might think that it would. Was the number of years with the firm correlating with productivity? Was prior work from home experience correlating with productivity? And was the adequacy of workspace in the employee's home correlating with productivity? And the answer to all four was no. None of these four factors, which we expected to correlate with productivity, in fact, did correlate with productivity. So those things didn't seem to make much of a difference. Let's think, well, what did? Three things. Number one, did the employee have adequate internet bandwidth? There was a definite correlation. If there was inadequate internet bandwidth, productivity was a problem. Were there personal distractions at home? Kids that were home from school, pets, whatever it was, if there were personal distractions, that hurt productivity. And the last thing was the percentage of time working from home. We found that people who worked a higher percentage from home were actually more productive than people who worked a lower percentage from home. They got better at it. When we ask for the biggest challenges, we asked, this is project managers. We asked project managers, what were their biggest challenges when their project team worked from home? The number one and the only one that crossed this 3.0 barrier was fewer ad hoc opportunities to exchange ideas at the water cooler. In other words, collaboration. And then you had some others, teamwork and so on. But most of these others did not reach this 3.0 barrier, either in the August survey or in the April survey. In fact, there really weren't that much difference. But in some cases, there were some. For example, on this one, loss of efficiency due to poor communications when the team members are separated, that actually got worse. Here's one that got better. Some team members have insufficient bandwidth during the time between April and August. People got better bandwidth. So you can see a little bit of a difference, but not huge. So the next thing is we asked the project managers is, compared to when everybody was working in the office, how much time are you spending on your projects? In April, about 2% said they were spending a lot less time. Nobody said that in August. In April, about 4% said that they were spending a little less time. That went up a little bit in August. But now we get into big bars. Most of them said they were spending about the same time. But let's look at these two here, because this is pretty interesting. In April, about 41% said they were spending a bit more time. That actually declined in August. And in April, about 12% said they were spending a lot more time, and that declined a little bit too. So if you look at these three together, what you see is they're way bigger. In fact, if you just look at these two, a bit more and a lot more, these two bars compared to these two bars, a lot less and a bit less, you can see that overall, definitely an increase in the amount of time that project managers have to spend when they are managing remote teams. What does that mean? It means for the same amount of revenue, you need more project management time. So if you had enough project managers to manage everybody when they were all in the office, you may not have enough project managers to manage the same number of people when you have some of them working from home. Let's do the next polling question. So this is first question here. before the pandemic, when everybody was working in the office, what percent of your internal meetings started on time? So let's answer that one first. If you can remember back to 2019, what percentage of your internal meetings started on time?
Dave, while we're waiting, people wanted to ask if you mean strictly work from home or work from anywhere when you
Really
ask
work
these.
from anywhere. Working remotely is probably a better way of saying it. Most people are working from home, but hey, some people go to Starbucks and work. So it's working from anywhere.
Okay, we're close to being closed. A couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to end it.
Wow. 0% or 1%. There's a couple of people out there that actually start all their internal meetings on time. My hat is off to you. You guys are cool. That number is actually triple for the number of people that never start their meetings on time. But the biggest bar is in the 75 to 99% time. Almost half the people surveyed, most of their meetings, in fact, most of the meetings, if you add the ones over 50%, it's if you add these bottom three bars together, that's most of the meetings start late. Wow, that's the biggest portion. Think about how much time is wasted. If your average internal meeting has 5 people and you average 20 minutes, let's just say you average 10 minutes late before you start, that's 50 minutes that you have wasted at every single one of those meetings where that time is gone. Let's do the next one now, and then we'll kind of compare those two results. And I think it's going to be really interesting. Launch the next one, Kathy. So now that you're doing Zoom meetings or Teams meetings or GoToMeetings or whatever platform you're using, now what percent of your internal meetings are now starting on time? Same options. I think we're going to see a different result.
Getting close to the end if you make your votes. All right, I'm going to close it. And I'm going to share it.
Well, it's not as different as I thought. I thought that a lot more people would be starting their meetings on. Oh, this is what percent of meetings starting on time. Yeah. So actually, in this one, most of the meetings are starting. What was that? Go back to that first one again. Yeah, go back to the result from the first one, Kathy. Yeah, actually, I was reading it wrong. So it's percent of meetings starting on time. Actually, most of the people were starting on time, and I guess most of the people are still starting on time. So that's actually pretty good, because my perception was that more people were starting meetings on time with the Zoom meetings that were in person. But actually, so you guys are actually doing okay on both counts. So let's move on from that one. That's an interesting commentary. Let's look at the impact of COVID-19 on company profits. So what we asked 100 firms, and this was on the 9th of October when this was all pretty well underway, about a month ago. How does your forecast financial performance for 2020 compare to what it was for 2019? And what we saw was almost exactly the same. The same number of firms were doing better as were doing not as good, and the rest of them about the same. But what's hidden in this is the disparity between the betters and the not as goods. So even though there was the same number of firms, they're very different. And what we've seen here in talking to firms is that the green bar is firms that were working in markets that were really not very affected by COVID-19, such as housing, water, wastewater, those kinds of firms, those kinds of markets really weren't very impacted. The red bar, those are firms that were working in markets that were impacted: hospitality, travel, the markets that were more transportation, even to a degree, those were firms that were operating in not so good markets. So what we've seen here is a big change. Even though the overall profit, if we take the average profit for 2020 for the industry, it's probably going to be about the same as 2019, but the composition is way different. The spread of firms in 2020 between poor performers and great performers is going to be much bigger than it was in 2019, depending on primarily on what markets you were in, but also there were some internal factors. Firms that were able to achieve better productivity with a remote workforce are going to be more profitable than firms that didn't. And I think that's a significant finding as well. Let's look at the three factors that drive profitability. And this is kind of an interesting one that we teach this and we talk a lot about it in our financial management seminar. There's really only three factors that affect almost all of profitability. One is what we call M, the direct labor multiplier, which is net revenue divided by direct labor. The second is utilization, which is direct labor divided by total labor on a dollar basis, not an hours basis. And the third is the non-labor overhead factor. And basically that is all of your overhead not associated with labor. In other words, office rent is probably the biggest one, company-owned vehicles, all those kinds of non-labor overhead. So those three things are what affect profitability. And at the top is the equation that brings them together. And if you do a regression between actual profitability and the profitability you calculate from those three things, you get a 92% correlation. That's a pretty high correlation. So let's look at some things that affect that. And this is the change in utilization. And generally not a big change. In firms of 1 to 20, the very small firms, they actually saw a little bit of an increase in utilization, about 2% overall. A similar decrease when you get into a little bit larger firms, and then you get a little bit of about a 1% increase in firms that are 51 to 200, then it dips a little. So you can see there's no real pattern here based on size, and they're all relatively the same. So if you're in one of these red groups here, where your utilization has actually dropped compared to last year, here's a suggested best practice for you to improve that. Get employees to forecast, to not only report on their timesheets what they did last week, but to forecast what they're going to do next week. And there's and not only on billable projects, but on what we call overhead jobs. And that sounds like an oxymoron. An overhead job is a specific activity that is going to be done on overhead. And I think the concept of an overhead job is really important if you're going to manage utilization properly. Every hour should have a name. Every hour, even on overhead, should be to pursue some objective. In this example here, this person's planning on spending 10 hours writing a proposal for General Motors. That has an objective. The objective is to win the work and get more revenue down the road. Also, 2 hours doing a performance review. That has an objective of improving performance. So every overhead hour should have an objective. And if you have that mindset, and if you ask people to forecast a week ahead at the same time that they're planning a week or reporting on the week behind, I think you can, this is a practice that firms have consistently found. We've talked to many firms that have implemented this. And they have about 80% of them have told us that, yeah, this is significantly increasing our utilization. Let's talk about direct labor multiplier. And now we did see a correlation. The firms of under 100 employees consistently had a deterioration in their direct labor multiplier, whereas the firms over 100 employees consistently had an improvement in their direct labor multiplier. And we attribute this to the fact that larger firms in general have more structured project management processes than smaller firms. Smaller firms tend to just kind of wing it, manage projects by the back of the envelope. If everybody's together in the office, you can kind of get away with that. If people are working remotely, it doesn't work. Larger firms actually saw an increase in their direct labor multiplier because they had better project management processes. So I want to give you 10 specific tactics that one large firm, we interviewed one large firm that has actually seen a significant increase in direct labor multiplier. And these are the specific tactics that they're using that you can use to increase your direct labor multiplier. The first thing is they measure productivity for each project manager based on what we call net revenue surplus or deficit, which is the difference between the direct labor multiplier that was the targeted multiplier versus the achieved multiplier. And the targeted multiplier is when you set up the job, the achieved multiplier is when you finish the job. And they measure that for each project manager and they report that individually by PM. The second thing is they found, as we have found, that hardware and software and bandwidth are essential. And so they made sure that, in fact, they pay, this particular firm actually pays to be sure that everybody has the hardware and software and bandwidth that they need. The third thing is this firm got hit with malware. They had the unfortunate experience of, and this is something that people are vulnerable to, and you got to be really careful of. What they did not pay enough attention to it, and so they were allowing people to use home computers to access their network, and some malware people used this to penetrate their network. They shut down all their data, and they had ransomware that was installed that until the firm paid them, this is a large firm, millions of dollars, they couldn't get their data back. So after that, they set up a closed system. If you do not have a closed system, if you're allowing employees to use their personal computers to access your network, you are in jeopardy of malware, in particular ransomware. The firm went from weekly timesheets to daily timesheets. And not only the number of hours, but they required a description of what was done for every hour. They initiated not a 1 week, but in this case, they had fairly large projects. They initiated a 2-week look ahead by each employee. We just talked about that. They established what they call micro budgets and schedules. And instead of scheduling things in weekly chunks, they scheduled things in chunks of days or even hours in some cases, and budgeted same way. At least twice a week, and in some cases even daily, each project team would have what they called a stand-up meeting, which only lasted 5 minutes, but it really focused on the deliverables and the milestones. So everybody on the team had to talk about what are they going to deliver coming up before the next meeting? What are some of the key milestones? And they had accountability on a regular, frequent basis. They found that QC was a particular problem. And so what they did is they planned ahead for remote QC reviews to be sure that those would happen, because they don't just happen. When everybody's in the office, it's easier to just say, hey, Sal, come over here and review these documents for me. Well, you got a few minutes? Sure. Well, it's harder to do that remotely, so they had to plan ahead for that. They did very frequent earned value analysis. For those of you who've been to PM Bootcamp or one of our other programs, you know what that is. If you haven't, earned value analysis is a system that I actually developed a long time ago, where people compared how much work has been done with how much money has been spent. So even though those analyses, which used to be done monthly, they're now doing them weekly, or in some cases even more often, less detailed, more frequently. And finally, they are really enforcing their previous practice of regularly scheduled project reviews between the project managers and the principals in charge. So look at these 10 things. If you're not doing these 10 things, I guarantee you, these things will increase your direct labor multiplier. The third factor is non-labor overhead. And what we found is that business travel, not just in our industry, but across the board, has had a major decline. These were the declines in business travel following the last 3 recessions. The recession that caused by 9/11 saw a drop of about 11% in business travel. The 2008 Great Recession saw a drop of about 8% in business travel. The COVID-19 recession saw an 89% drop in business travel. So it's been huge. Now, the lesson here is everybody here, I'm willing to bet, is saving money on non-labor overhead. Some of those savings can continue. So for example, visiting clients, even after you're able to get on airplanes and travel and not wear masks, maybe some of those client visits can continue to be virtual. Training, this is something that we're really seeing. There's a firm, about a 600-person firm, AE firm in Minnesota that we do project management training every year. And every year, we send an instructor to Minnesota to their headquarters. They fly people in from all over the country to attend these project management training programs, our PM boot camp, 2 days. So this year, they didn't want to not do it. They wanted to continue to have the training, so we did it virtually. And they figured, well, it's not going to be as good as doing it in person, but hey, it's better than waiting until this thing is over, so we got to do something, so let's go ahead and do it. So what they found was, yeah, maybe the training wasn't quite as good as everybody being in person, but it was pretty darn close. And so now they've made a decision that even after COVID is done, instead of flying people from all over the country to attend this training program in Minneapolis, it's going to be done virtually from now on. And they're going to save a huge amount of travel time and travel costs. We talked about office space. A significant percentage of the people on this line are going to be renting less square footage. And you know what else? There is a glut of office space on the market right now. What that means is when your office lease comes up, you are probably going to be in a position to not only negotiate fewer square feet per employee, but you're probably going to be able to get fewer dollars per square foot negotiated into your next lease. And then another one, this was kind of surprising. I didn't realize it. One firm we talked to said, you know, we have seen a dramatic drop in our printing costs. And we're taking half of the Xerox machines and half of the plotters out of the office because people have shown that they really don't need to print that much and they really don't need to plot that much as they had been. And so they're expecting to see a major savings in printing costs. So some of these non-labor costs, you can continue to see major savings even when the whole pandemic thing is done. So a few final recommendations, and then we'll open up to some more questions. Number one, your employees want to work part-time from home or part-time from Starbucks or wherever it is they're working from. You need to embrace that. You need to make that a recruiting tool, a retention tactic, or you will lose them. Make sure while you're doing that you give them secure, high-speed internet service. Make sure they have it and that it is secure. Create structured socialization opportunities. Many of you have been forced into doing that. It's much easier to do that ad hoc when people are in the office. When people are working from home, you have to create that in a structured way. And by the way, while you're doing it, see if you can save a few bucks on rent. Number two, 3 things to keep an eye on: utilization, direct labor multiplier, non-labor overhead. Keep your eyes glued on those 3 metrics. Invest in improving project management. Working from home requires more structured project management. It requires more project managers. One of the things that we showed you was that the amount of project management time is going to be more. You're going to need more PMs for the same amount of work, same number of employees. And they're going to need new skills because managing a remote work team is different from managing when everybody's in the office. So the last thing is we hope for those of you who are not PSMJ members, you can become a member. And Kathy, you want to tell them about this offer for today for the people that are on the line?
Yes, we have a great book with stuffed with work from home policies. And what we did was we collected policies from firms and we shared them with the people that participated. And now you can get it for free if you become a member with this so if you do join, you will get it automatically. We'll send it out. If you want to renew as well, we could do that too, send you out the book. If you already have this book and you have another book in mind, just tell Diane and I, we'll take care of it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. We've actually tripled our membership since the pandemic started, and people are finding some real benefits in membership, and we're looking at probably raising our membership fees in January. So now is really a good time to take advantage of this offer if you're not already a member, or even if you are.
Right. All right, so questions. One came in, I just want to get to before I get to some of the other ones that were submitted. I kind of combined the submitted ones, but this one is about, and we've seen it even here, people are, what's your comment about people who take their computer with them, maybe on vacation, or people who are relocating now to even further away from the office?
I think that's going to be the new world we're living. I think that's, the whole idea of work-life balance is all changing, and work-life blending. The distinction between being at work and being off of work. Now, for hourly employees, that's a different proposition. But for exempt employees, yeah, I think that's what the world's going to look like, and you need to get on board with that. Now, again, make sure that you've got good security. I've actually talked to 3 different firms that have been hacked and spent millions of dollars in ransomware to get their data back. So keep that security in mind. Make sure that it's a closed system and it's tightly secure. Other than that, you got to do it.
The next question, that was from Ethan, but the next question is from Chris. He was wondering, what's the best way to check in with team members and how frequently?
It's a lot more. It takes a lot more now when they're remote. I personally think this one firm, they do it a minimum. They require a minimum of twice a week for their project managers. And when you talk to their project managers, most of them do it every day. They just have a very quick, 5, maybe 10-minute meeting first thing in the morning. What's everybody going to do today? And then the next day they talk about, hey, did you get it done? And that's an important part of it. You can't just talk about what you're going to do. You have to also report on what you did, because accountability is changing. People have to be accountable for their own time now. You can't just watch them. They need to be accountable. So that's different.
Mark asks about a work from home agreement. Do you, what are your thoughts on it? Should you cover equipment, internet costs? What do you think?
Yeah, in fact, this is it, right, Kathy?
Right. Policy.
We've collected a bunch of them, 57 of them. That's exactly, yeah, we think you need to have one, and here's some good ones.
Right. Terry asks, she's wondering about morale, staff engagement, connection with each other, but also reducing burnout. Have you heard a lot about burnout?
So, it's really interesting. One of the things that we looked for in this study group here between April and August was burnout. Are people just getting tired of working from home and really just yearning to get back to the office and have some collegial work? We found just the opposite. We found that people are getting more comfortable working from home. And so now maybe, as time goes by, there may be some more burnout. Nobody wants to work, or hardly anybody wants to work entirely from home. But people are feeling more comfortable working part-time from home. And they're even, the shift has gone from most people wanting to work mostly in the office, part-time from home. Now it's shifted to people wanting mostly at home and only part-time in the office. So people are feeling more comfortable. They're not burning out.
This is from David, but we have an HR group that meets once a month. And this is something that they talked about in the last meeting, and we talk about it every single meeting. They are faced with a leadership that wants people back in the office, not 100%, but they want them back in some sense. And we have the people who are staff members who say that they're worried about COVID. Some of them have documented them through social media, going out to eat. They have maybe a volunteer jobs that they have. And so how do you deal with that?
I think different people have different attitudes about their risk of COVID. Some people have a very lackadaisical attitude and they really don't think it's a big deal. Other people, have a very extreme attitude. They think it's a huge deal. I think you have to respect every individual's attitude, and particularly those people who may have a more strict attitude than you do if you're a manager. You have to respect that. That's their attitude, and health and safety is very important. Anybody who has done any work for any large corporate clients, you know how much emphasis they put on health and safety. I mean, they obsess about health and safety, and reported injury rates and that sort of thing. I think you have to include COVID-19 concerns in that kind of attitude.
How long do you think this specific environment's going to last?
So, most people think that probably by the second quarter of next year, thereabouts, there should be enough people vaccinated and also there should be enough improvements in COVID treatments between the vaccinations and the medication improvements. Most people are pretty much thinking that by second quarter of next year, we can start taking the masks off and things will, be pretty much back to normal. But until then, you kind of have to live with it.
Cybersecurity, you brought it up. What's the best way to go about that? Do you, how do you do that? Do you create a way to people to log in and have the secure channel for their personal hotspots? Does that need to be all secure as well?
So
I mean, people who deal with the government, they have to do it. So maybe they're used to it, but other people don't.
I'm really not an IT expert. I'm not going to profess to be one, but the 3 firms that I've talked to that all got hacked with ransomware, all got hacked the same way. And that was that they allowed their employees' personal computers to be connected to their networks. So that is definitely a problem. Beyond that, I would defer to somebody who knows way more about IT security than I do.
Have you found the ticker going this way, where people are talking about now they can hire anyone in the world to work on their projects? Have you had that conversation with leadership?
Yeah, in fact, one firm that we've featured a couple of times on our senior executive briefings that we do regularly, they started a structural engineering company about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And when even though they're in Boston, when they started the company, they wanted to attract labor from everywhere because there wasn't enough good labor in Boston. And so they actually set up the company and structured the company in such a way that they could hire people without ever literally without ever even personally interviewing them. They did everything, including screening and interviewing and onboarding and everything else remotely. And they did this before the pandemic. And so now for them, it's like, oh, this is no big deal. We're just doing the same things we've always done. And what they found, this is a relatively small company. It's only about, 15, 20 employees. But if you look at them, they're structured much more like a 300-person company than a 15 or 20-person company. You have to be more structured if you're going to allow your workforce to work remotely. And they have, and they're very successful at it.
All right, 2 more questions. In the past, we've seen people who've moved away. They started the branch office. Remember, they become the person who starts that new office. Do you see that becoming more so, or just staying remote worker? I mean, I guess it has to do with the person. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, we have found in the past, we've looked at this a lot, and we found that the best way to start a new office is to send somebody that's been an employee, a trusted, valued employee for a long time, send them to a new location. That's turned out to be statistically much more successful than hiring a new employee in that location. It's easier for somebody who knows the company to learn a new location than it is for somebody who knows the location to learn a new company. So that's always been a much better approach. There's been successes and failures either way, but statistically, that's been a better approach. Now, I think there's a new wrinkle in that equation. And before, when you open the new office, you pretty much had to rent office space. Well, now clients are willing to say, okay, you're working at home. No big deal. And so I think the bar is a little bit lower. You no longer have to actually rent office space. Companies are now starting new offices from employees' homes. And then when they finally get to the point where they've got enough local work to hire 1 or 2 new people, then they rent the office. So the upfront cost and risk of starting a new office, I think, has actually dropped.
This is the last question. Again, this was something that was brought up by the HR people as well. How do you reestablish expectations? And when do you take into consideration those expectations? For instance, people want to work till 10 o'clock at night, but they don't want to start till 10, in the morning or something like that. So what do you think about reestablishing expectations?
So I think what you have to do is, in the past, when everybody's in the office, you can kind of intermix collaborative time with personal uninterrupted time. You can't do that when people work remotely. You have to plan collaborative time and plan uninterrupted personal time. And so I think that's really the answer, is it has to be much more structured. If you're going to have, like, for example, we talk about these daily huddles, 5 or 10-minute huddles, that's planned collaboration time. And I think in this environment, that's what you have to do. You can't just allow it to happen. You have to plan it.
Great. Okay, that wraps up the session. Thank you, everyone, for coming and spending some time with us this afternoon. A reminder, I will be sending out an email tomorrow, and that's going to have, Dave, you're going to send me your slides, your updated slides.
We'll do it right now.
Alrighty, and the recording and attendance certificate. So thank you, everyone, for helping us out, joining us today. And Dave, any last words?
Yeah, if you're not a member already, become a member.
Join us.
There's all kinds of great benefits. I think you'll find it's one of the best things that you can do, and it doesn't even cost hardly any. What are we charging for membership now, Kathy?
It's $4.97, but we can make a deal for friends of Dave. We know that.
It's the best money you'll ever spend. I promise you.
That's
thanks again.
Annual.
And I hope to see you in the near future, but in real life, and actually shake your hand. So hopefully that won't be far away.
Soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.